Hey everyone, Ryan here, back with another season breakdown. Today I'm going to be discussing my season in the Sandbox League, in which I participated in the Twin Leaf Division. Sandbox is a league in which you can only use those little cut Pokemon, so it was all baby Pokemon this go. Specifically, Twin Leaf Division is sort of eternal, in that whatever the generational gimmick will not be utilized in Twin Leaf, so there was no Dynamax. This was just straight up normal VGC. I haven't really gotten to play that in a draft league setting before, actually, which is kind of funny. I have been doing doubles draft league since Gen 8, and I've never actually done a non-max league in Gen 8. So while I've played in a lot of non-max formats before on ladder and such, I had never actually drafted in non-max. So I was actually very excited because I actually really like non-max formats. And I want to go ahead and real quick say that I now have a really awesome logo. I was the Schmoovin' Shroomishes, decided it was finally time to get a nice looking logo. I'd like to thank Lauren for it. That was very good Thai food I paid you with. So, without too much further ado, let's kind of get into the actual draft for the season. So, I had a relatively late spot in the draft, so my goal was to halt synergies from other players. One thing I noticed with Little Cup was that there were a lot of like really strong combos, and one combo that stuck out to me that I saw was that Emboss grabbed Tangela, and I was extremely worried about Chlorophyll Tangela Vulpix. I was looking at that combo myself as being very, very potent. I decided to snipe it, so Vulpix ended up being my first pick, which ended up not really mattering. It turned out Emboss wasn't planning on going Vulpix after we talked about it, but ultimately I still am pretty happy with that decision because in part I was interested in grabbing Weather. I did really want Sun or Hail. Actually, I didn't write Hail on there, but one of the two because I actually hadn't played with those in Gen 8 and I thought it'd be fun to. I went out of my way also to simply avoid Tier 0 and plan a very balanced budget. As a moderator for the server and that sort of thing, I wasn't sure how Tier 0 would balance out in Twin Leaf, so I wanted to build a team without a Tier 0 to see how it would perform in order to give me a good sense of if making a really balanced budget where you get more high tier Pokemon pays off into some of these Tier 0s. I was really interested in making a hyper offensive team this go. I wanted something that was very read heavy for quick games. I did not want to be. I honestly, this season for Sandbox, I just really wanted to have a lot of fun. I wasn't planning on like super delving deep into draft prep most weeks. There were some exceptions, but overall, I took this league a little bit. The regular season, at least, was a little bit more casual, but I wanted the team itself to be very competitive. So a lot of the team was very easy to slot on a given week. A lot of Pokemon on this comp were just very good with 3 attacking moves and protect, and just blitzing an opponent down. So that's sort of how I built the team, just so that it could kind of autopilot itself. So my first impressions of this draft, I really did like it. The initial draft I thought was really cool. It had a power level I was looking for, which was pretty big. I talked about not wanting a Tier 0. I wanted a team that from top to bottom looked like I could bring everything, and it looked like that was the case, and I got most of the tools I wanted. The thing I was probably most hyped about was the Oddish Vulpix Helioptile Sun Core. Early season, we'll talk a little bit more about that core throughout the video, but I will say that early on I was like, holy moly, this is going to be so fun. Things that I did have some misgivings about in my early draft whenever I was kind of looking at it, not having played with it yet. I was wary of some of the speed tiers on the team. I didn't get as fast as a lot of other teams, and the TR mode felt a little underbaked at times, so that was one thing I was a little concerned about, since my TR setter was relatively fast, being Mime Jr., but we'll go into that in a bit. I felt the defensive synergy on the team was pretty good overall, but it wasn't perfect. Because you're operating with Sun Team stuff, there are certain moves that ended up being very good into my team, like Poison and Fire were very good into me, and some other typings were pretty solid. So it ended up being one of those where, while I overall really liked the defensive synergy of the team and I was able to pivot pretty consistently, it did have some holes that did get abused by a couple coaches. It did feel like a top team. Like, we didn't do PRs for Sandbox this go, but I will say that my initial impression was that it was at least in the top half. It didn't feel like a absolute top team, though. I think that my early impression was teams like Flamingos and M-Bosses especially. Those both looked a lot stronger than mine comparatively. Again, these are early impressions. How that plays out over the course of the season we'll get into, but I do think Flamingo had the best team, and I increasingly thought so over the course of the season. So we'll get into that in a little while. So now we enter the Mon rating part of the video. So I will not be discussing each individual Mon, as I didn't use some of them enough to offer anything super substantive. I will give general thoughts on some stuff, though, that I didn't end up utilizing as much. Mon rating, and I want to be very clear on this, is based on my team. It is not a greater context, oh, this is how I think X Mon is in draft. If I think a Mon was significant enough to be retiered, seeing as this is the first season, I will make note of that. So if I did have a Mon that I do think should move a tier, I will make note of that. I largely won't be doing that, though. I actually think that my team, at least for this tier list, was very, very good. I feel like most things were tiered 100% properly from what I had. And again, I'm talking about team context here, so specifically my team and also my playstyle. So my playstyle means that there are some of these mons that maybe I didn't use as effectively. There were mons that I leaned towards more than others, that sort of thing. So there is, I'm being very open that there is an inherent bias here. It's not a theoretical discussion. This is just sort of my feelings on how things ended up performing. Lastly, Dratini and Qfint will not receive a actual official ranking, but I'm going to go ahead and share my general thoughts now. Qfint I'll go ahead and start with because I traded Qfint for Dratini. Qfint I mostly just grabbed because I wanted a Steel type. Steel type felt really good defensively for my comp, even with the fire weakness. I wanted something with a poison immunity, something that could hit some ice types, things like that. Since I had some, because I was about to play Burst. So Qfint ended up not coming to any games, but based on early impressions and calcs and stuff, it was very close to coming my last couple weeks. I feel like it's probably a pretty good mon for where it's at. I wouldn't say it's bad. Dratini probably doesn't need to be moved a tier, but I'm kind of the opinion dragon types might not be awesome. I wanted to bring Dratini multiple times. I think it came to team preview once. But ultimately, I mean, the set I was always looking at were like the Dragon Dance and the Marvel scale sets and things like that. But ultimately, it wasn't getting a lot of calcs I wanted, and with fairy types being very good and ice types being actually shockingly good in this format and some things like that, while the dragon type defensively seemed really good, like offensively you weren't hitting much super effectively, and the more limited move pools kind of had some things. I do think, though, that like banded E-Speed, Dragon Dance E-Speed stuff with Dratini is going to be very good. I just never had a moment on my team where Dratini was able to do those things. So probably doesn't need to be retiered or anything, but I will say that I had multiple weeks where I wanted to bring it, and it was just outcompeted by other things on the team. So that's just something I think that's worth sharing. Okay, moving on to the actual team. So first pick and overall, and my first Pokemon, Vulpix. I'm giving Vulpix kind of an 8.5 out of 10, which I think is very good for a tier 1. Some pros. Drought boosted fire moves, and Heat Wave just did ridiculous damage even without any special attack investment. I mean, seriously, like, Sun boosted Heat Wave from Vulpix, even off its, like, I think it's base 65 special attack stat, even without investing in it, was an absolute nuke. I didn't end up running Overheat as much as I thought I would, but there were times where it was like, oh, Overheat just, like, kills that thing from neutral with like no special attack investment. Really, really good on that front. If the target was soft to fire type moves, it was very strong in that respect. It has actually a pretty solid speed tier, and its bulk was actually kind of usable. It wasn't great. I'm not going to say Vulpix had great bulk, but into some of the bulkier teams that didn't have as much offensive presence, Vulpix could actually stick around for a while. And especially for a mon used for its ability, having it be really fast was really nice. The move pool was decently deep. I liked some of the stuff on it. Hypnosis in particular, and Howl and things like that, and Baby Doll Eyes were all moves that I liked that on the support side of things. And offensively, I got some good coverage. Dark Pulse and Energy Ball were probably the two most common brings, but I did look into Extrasensory a few times. Overall, though, I did really like the move pool, speed tier, all those things. And it worked well with a nice variety of items. I ran Scarf on it, I ran Sash on it, I think one time I ran Heat Rock, I ran Blunder Policy, It just works well with a lot of different things. I don't think it's a mon you typically would want to be your Eviolite mon, but in theory it has an okay stat line for that if you had someone really soft to fire types. Some cons, it was kind of frail into hyper offensive comps. The bulk is usable, but it's not awesome. There were some teams that just overwhelmed Vulpix really hard. It also really struggled into types that checked it naturally. Like, its Energy Ball doesn't really pick up KOs on water types, and notably ground and rock types really screwed with it. Vulpix had a really hard time anytime I had a ground type I was facing, or a rock type. That was always really scary. And it was sometimes difficult to lead despite being a lead Pokemon. Like, it's vulnerable to Fake Out. If you're running it, it kind of leaves itself open. Vulpix is not a mon that can, on turn 1, do something super significant that isn't click Heat Wave or click Support Move, and it didn't flowchart particularly well. It was like, well, I hope he leads this, which I don't love that in the lead role mon, which is what it's primarily supposed to do. Vulpix also doesn't usually feel like a tier 1. Like, whenever you use a tier 1, you're kind of expecting certain damage out of it, certain bulk, certain whatever. I didn't feel that very often. It's just a mon that made the whole team much better. Having Sun and building a team with a solid Sun mode was why Vulpix felt very good. It wasn't because Vulpix in of itself is a mon that you draft in tier 1. Like, if you're drafting Vulpix in tier 1 and you don't have, like, Bulbasaur or Oddish with it, then Vulpix is going to underperform for you insanely hard. It really needs, or Tangela, I guess, but it just really needs something that abuses Sun well to let it feel very good. But overall, I think Vulpix was a really solid mon. I think it's a great tier 1 pick and will remain that way. Very solid overall. Next is probably my most contentious thought process, but we'll go into that, is Mienfoo, which I'm giving a 7 out of 10 to. And I do have some pros for it, and 7 out of 10 might seem high to some people who've heard me talking about it a few times. Some pros, I think Inner Focus Fake Out is just amazing. I mean, there's no way around that. That's pretty much perfect combo of things. The move pool is really solid. I mean, it's got a lot of offensive and support options. It's primarily supposed to function as an offensive utility mon, or at least that's how I felt it was supposed to function on my team. That's not what it ended up doing some of the time, but we'll get there. The fighting type resist to dark was actually really nice on a prep end. I had a few mons that were a little vulnerable to knockoff and things like that, so having something that could switch in on that's great. The one thing I will absolutely say for Mienfoo, it is awesome at clicking knockoff every turn. It very consistently could knock off 2 mons on the opponent's team, which in this format is ridiculous. So Mienfoo definitely got a lot of brownie points for how good of a knockoff spam option it was. So now we kind of go into the cons, and So first off, it has really bad, like, 4 move slot syndrome, at least when I used it. I feel like I couldn't slot everything I needed for a given matchup. And the thing was, the combo of Protect and Close Combat, Fake Out and or U-Turn, Knockoff / Feint, pretty much always had to come. For me, at least. That's how it felt. I brought Coaching a few times, but we'll get into that in a second. Overall, though, the fact that it felt like I had to run the Protect CC, Fake Out or U-Turn, Knockoff or Feint, like that kind of a grouping of moves, could feel really bad. Because while a lot of those moves are very good and can work really well, it didn't give me that versatility I wanted, and I did find that some opponents were able to predict and play around it pretty well. The speed tier is good, but it wasn't good enough. This is more a team issue than a Mienfoo issue, but my team didn't have anything that broke base 70 speed. Mienfoo being 65 was not awesome for me, because it just wasn't fast enough. I needed Mienfoo to outspeed more things, and it couldn't without a Scarf, and I didn't love it as a Scarf option a lot of the time over other picks like Vulpix. It was actually pretty frail with Eviolite, and it didn't feel like it was worth it based on the calcs. People can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I remember doing calcs particularly into Psychic types, things like Gothita and Muna and things like that, and it was like, oh wow, Eviolite isn't awesome. Like, you know, it was like Psychic plus this spread move the team have would kill me or whatever. I didn't feel like Eviolite was great for the slot, but that could be wrong, but I don't regret not putting Eviolite on Mienfoo more. It was offensively also just outclassed by most of the low-tier mons on the squad. Like, Mienfoo's base attack stat isn't really that high. So things like Oddish, Zorua, Cubone, Corphish, Helioptile, and honestly Vulpix and Sun all outdamaged it, which felt really bad for a tier 1 mon that I wanted to get good damage out of. Coaching's actually pretty interesting. It was a little tough in non-max, mostly just, and this is a team issue, was because my physical attackers had really low SpDef. Cubone and Corphish have kind of awful SpDef stats, so it ended up not working out. And on the offensive point, I'm way too much of a bitch for Reckless. I think Reckless is a really scary ability to run. Reckless high jump kicks from Mienfoo absolutely gets calcs. That stuff is a menace. It does so much damage. But you also have to make a read that your opponent's not going to click Protect in a format where Protect is arguably one of the best moves. And I don't like taking those kind of 50-50s. That's a me problem, not a Mienfoo problem. But overall, I mean, I didn't dislike Mienfoo. I should be clear on that. I think that it is an overall pretty good Pokemon that didn't fit my comp as well as I thought it would, and I do think that overall some Psychic types and Fairy types that proved really good on other teams over the course of the season also really influenced my opinion on this. So overall, not a bad mon. I don't think it needs to leave tier 1. I think it's perfectly fine in tier 1. I think on a team that isn't mine, it will perform much better in tier 1 too, like a team that's lacking in some of the support stuff and maybe needs something with its kind of offensive stats, or a team that really needs that knockoff spam to get KOs. Mienfoo's going to be awesome on a team like that. But for the team I had, it was okay. It wasn't what I wanted it to be, though. Next is Helioptile, which, speaking of mons that weren't what I wanted them to be, and God, I'm really sad about that, because Helioptile is genuinely one of my favorite Pokemon. I love the Heliolisk line. Overall rating 6.5 out of 10. The pros were the damage output potential was insane. Helioptile and Sun with solar power is pretty much the best nuke, period, in the format. This thing could kill almost anything, even if they were teching for it. It was really bad. Like, just how insane some of that damage was. Round is actually pretty funny and actually good in theory. A lot of Pokemon get Round, especially on my comp. I had Round on things like my Junior, Vulpix, and I'm forgetting a few, Rookidee and some others. Round is actually funny and actually pretty good. Getting Stab Round, getting the double base power on it, like, because it also would let me run a slower Helioptile, which was something I kind of liked. It's good in theory. In practice, I don't think Round works as well as I wanted it to, but it's pretty fun. The move pool does have pretty good coverage overall. It's not perfect coverage, but having things like Dark Pulse and normal stab moves is good. Speed tier is awesome. Base 70 was it was the fastest mon on the team, and I liked it for that. And it did check some mons that Sun teams would struggle to handle without it being there. There were a few matchups where Helioptile was very key because it could kill things that Oddish and Vulpix could not kill, which was really important. The cons, though, oh my god, it's so frail. God, Helioptile dies to everything. And solar power means that you can't use Sash on it, and you really wanted Sash on Helioptile because it's taking that 12% of its max HP, and then Sash doesn't matter, and it's dead at the end of a turn anyway. It's just a really unfortunate situation to be in where you have a mon that wants that, and it doesn't work. It also rarely didn't have a safe way to KO more than one mon. It gets some okay spread moves, but it doesn't get Hyper Voice. It only has Swift, and it got things like Electro Web and Discharge, which didn't... I mean, Discharge could pick up KOs, but it was a little awkward to have Cubone on the squad with it at the same time sometimes. So that ended up not really coming into play very much. Discharge would be... If you had like a good Discharge spam, I think Helioptile would probably bump up quite a bit on your team. But as it stood, its spread damage wasn't awesome, because Swift wasn't picking up a lot of KOs and things like that. So, but its Thunderbolt would pretty much kill anything on the field. The issue is that if you clicked Thunderbolt into something, it clicked Protect, and then the other Pokemon attacked Helioptile, Helioptile died instantly. It was not a question of if it would die, it was dead. Because of that, it was ultimately a mon that was usually trading 1 for 1, instead of a mon that was trading 2 for 1, like you would want it to be, because its bulk really let it down. and Solar Power doing that chip meant that it couldn't get a 2-for-1 with Sash. Overall, I think Helioptile is really cool. I think Tier 2 is going to stay appropriate for it. Because I do think that if you had a team with a really good discharge spam option, and I think it's just really solid, like even out of Sun, I think Helioptile would be really good, like on a rain team even, that'd be kind of fun. So yeah, I think it was pretty good mon. That just, it's too frail. It's really hard to make work, but I do think that there are theoretical comps where it fits much better. So moving on, next we have Oddish, which is a mon I have no misgivings about. Basically, Oddish gets a 9 out of 10. Oddish was absolutely fantastic in Sun and in TR. I ran Oddish with the ability Runaway, which literally doesn't do anything, just because in TR it was so good. Because at base 30 speed, it underspeeds like everything, and when you make Oddish really bulky, it lives everything. So TR Oddish was really good. And in Sun, man, this thing was a monster. It picked up a lot of KOs that really shocked me. It gets very fast with base 30. I almost never ran into issues outspeeding stuff. We'll get into that in a little bit. Because different prep from a couple opponents could have meant that was an issue. But Oddish overall, super, super strong. It's a very good Eviolite option. I ended up running Eviolite Oddish a couple times, and it was usually one of the mons I would always calc Eviolite for, because Oddish had really good natural bulk that with Eviolite was even further augmented, and when I ran Eviolite, I liked running Synthesis on it, so it could even heal up and be even more unkillable. That was really fun. I thought it was a really good Eviolite choice. I didn't get to use the physical sets because it gets like SD and growth and stuff like that. They seemed really dangerous, though. The fact that it has setup stuff I thought was really cool. I didn't end up getting to use it, but I thought that there will be teams that will get to use that, and that will be cool in the future. It's got a really awesome support move pool. After You was something that I actually ended up teching on it at one point. Sleep Powder and Synthesis were all awesome. Sleep Powder in particular won me games. I mean, it's actually kind of shocking because I felt like most opponents would prep really hard for Oddish Sleep Powder, and truthfully, a lot of them didn't. So there were times where I would just click Sleep Powder and both mons on the field would, and the opponent basically had no defensive counterplay other than hoping I'd miss. And like, I didn't even run Wide Lens on it, and it didn't particularly matter. So yeah, even just the threat of sleep in of itself is really strong. And its offensive output's awesome. I mean, it's got really good damage. I ran it with Life Orb a few times. It does need Life Orb occasionally to get calcs, but that usually ends up not being a huge deal. And Moonblast and Dazzling Gleam were awesome moves to have for coverage. Being able to tech a fairy move onto it was super, super good because it let it handle dragon types that give Vulpix an issue. So Oddish ended up actually being a pretty dedicated, like, fairy killer. Sorry. It ended up it was a dedicated fairy killer. It's a poison type, but it ended up beating a lot of fairy and dragon types, which you don't expect from a mon like this. There are some cons though. It doesn't get Weather Ball. That's kind of Bulbasaur has bulk and Weather Ball over Oddish, and a slightly faster speed tier. No Weather Ball did hurt, but it does have offenses to make up for that. The speed ended up being a non-issue in Sun, but it could have been. Base 30, even in Sun, fully invested, a lot of teams can outspeed that with Scarf Pokemon. So it was possible for people to outspeed Oddish. Didn't end up happening, but it was always on the radar, and it would have been a very good way to knock it out early and kind of destroy the mode early. I was always very, very worried about that. Defensively, it's actually pretty scary into opposing fire types. If the opponent has like really good fire types, Oddish is super scary to bring, especially because in Sun, where you want it most of the time, it doesn't live with Akaberry. There's a couple, I would run calcs and it'd be like, oh, does it eat this fire move with Akaberry even in Sun? And the answer is no, it never does. Don't try it. But overall, I mean, Oddish is fantastic. I actually think it could fit on a lot of archetypes of teams. Like, even just on a team that had Prankster in, like, a really solid TR mode, Oddish would be extremely good. Super great mon. Tier 2 does feel appropriate for it. It did have some flaws, but a very, very good pick. I'm super happy with it. I think I would love to use it again, honestly. Next is Cubone, which I'm also was quite fond of. I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10 rating. I really liked it. The pros, Cubone basically just destroys everything. Cubone's kind of like the dedicated, if this thing has Eviolite, please kill it in one turn Pokemon. It is so strong with Thick Club, it's ridiculous. And even without Thick Club, so a couple times it would get knocked off and things like that, the damage output was still pretty good. Lightning Rod and Battle Armor are awesome abilities. I mean, Lightning Rod in particular is just fantastic. Battle Armor is really good into having certain mons too that would check it otherwise. So like, for example, when I was facing down a Ponyta for Ollie, I ran Battle Armor because crit Flare Blitz killed could kill. But Battle Armor meant that it couldn't, ever. So the assurance that Battle Armor can give Cubone into specific Pokemon is very, very nice. Its coverage is great. It can basically hit anything you need it to. I often would run Boomerang, Rock Slide, Fire Punch, or that was pretty much my go-to. Fast Cubone was actually really good. I ran Cubone with good speed, with a lot of speed IVs, because it can actually outspeed some stuff out of TR that people don't expect. So I actually ran it with pretty high speed EVs on a few occasions, and that did win me games. Like, I think that was key in beating a few of my really tough games, was the fast Cubone. And it was really great in TR too. I mean, obviously it's kind of a TR Pokemon, and it's really good in it. The physical defense stat was also really good. Cubone's Phys Def is actually really high for what it is, and it's got a pretty solid enough base HP stat, so it can actually tank physical hits like very, very well, which was really good, in that it didn't have the problem Helioptile did, because I was very rarely worried that I would be trading Cubone in front of physical attackers. Like, I pretty much knew Cubone could get a 2-for-1 in a lot of scenarios I needed it to. And it has good spread damage with Rock Slide. There are some cons though. Its Spidef stat is so bad. Oh my gosh, that is awful. It can pretty much die to any water type or any grass type that has a special move worth its salt. Like, it'll just drop. And it's also kind of vulnerable to spread moves like Dazzling Gleam and the like, which is not great. So the Spidef stat is kind of one of its biggest drawbacks. Most moves also have pretty shaky accuracy. I mean, you're relying on stuff a lot of the time like Boomerang and Rock Slide, which I had one set where I missed like 3 Boomerangs, and you just kind of know that going into it with Cubone, that it missing a move can cost you games. It very rarely did for me, but I do feel that it is worth noting that Cubone is intrinsically somewhat risky. The moves that it relies on do have risk to them that other offensive Pokemon probably don't. And it is slightly item locked. You can run things that aren't Thick Club. In fact, Eviolite Cubone gets really good calcs, and it gets some other stuff too. But truthfully, for what I was using it for, which was just destroying whatever the biggest problem on the field was that had too much bulk for anything else to kill, you need Thick Club, and there's not really a way around that. So, and opponents can prep for that. So, it's a mon that is very vulnerable to knockoff. So those are kind of all the cons. I think it's in a really awesome spot. I think it's a really, really, really good Pokemon to grab on a team, and I feel like it fit my comp how it will fit pretty much any comp it's on. If you have even this okay enough TR mode, and you just grab Cubone, it'll do what it's supposed to do. So really liked it. I give 8.5, really strong mon, loved it. Next is the best mon on the team, Mime Jr. Oh my god. Overall rating 10 out of 10. Mime Jr. was my best performer of the season, bar none. I already liked the Mime Jr. I already liked the Mr. Mime line a lot in draft, but Mime Jr. is operating on another level. Like, it's so much better than even like Mime Galar with Eviolite in Series 9 Dynamax. It's competing with like Follow Me Filter Mime in formats that allow it. It's really that good. Filter is ridiculously broken with Eviolite. Mime Jr. can live stab, steal, poison moves basically for days. I had, I think it was the game where I faced Skrelp, where the Skrelp clicked no, it wasn't Skrelp, but I had a couple games where it was like, I was facing down something with Sludge Bomb or whatever else, and it was like, yeah, it eats 3 of those. Filter's so good. With Eviolite in particular, very strong. The typing is absolutely incredible. Fairy Psychic is so good because you are neutral to dark, and because you have Filter, you have like basically no weaknesses. Mime Jr. is really, really hard to kill. and its typing, giving it that Psychic and Fairy combo, was also offensively consistently amazing. The fact that it checked so many Pokemon, including Dark types, was awesome for it. The damage output was also really good without investment. I actually usually didn't run this thing with a lot of special attack. It'd usually only be like 20 so EVs or so, and it was consistently getting 2 to 3 hit KOs with Dazzling Gleam, and like Psychic always did a lot, and into super effective threats it killed stuff. Really great. The biggest reason Mime Jr. is so ridiculous is that its roll compression is insane. I had this thing use Icy Wind, Fake Out, I had it be my TR setter, I had it be a nasty plot sweeper, I had it be this and a that and a this and a that. It's ridiculous. Mime Jr. can do literally anything you want it to do and do it well on the team, because Filter Eviolite means that it's basically impossible to stop, which is just really good. And its offensive move pool is so good. It just eclipses most fully evolved Pokemon. I ran Shadow Ball and Thunderbolt and Icy Wind and Dazzling Gleam and Psychic and all these moves. I mean, just insane. And it was, as I've emphasized a few times, it was the best candidate for Eviolite pretty much into any matchup. Like, if I didn't know what to put Eviolite on, Mime Jr. was the safest bet consistently, and I don't regret that. The only the biggest con it has is its ludicrously low HP stat. Mime Jr. has 20 base HP. It has a really good Spit F stat. Like a very good, I think it's like 90 or something, and it's got an okay like Fizz Def, but you do have to bump its physical defense so that it can die, so it doesn't die to anything. Like, I ended up running almost max HP Mime Jr. every time I brought it, so that was fun. And then I think it just needs to be tier 2 next season. That's the other con. It's too strong in tier 3, especially in this format. Unless there's like a significant amount of power creep, I do think this is going to be one that we need to move to a different spot. So that's pretty much my thoughts on Mime Jr. Fantastic Mon. I think it's the only thing I think that needs to be retiered for next season, along with potentially some of the other Psychic types. I'd love to hear some thoughts from some Twin Leaf coaches on how they felt about some of the other kind of bulky Psychic types with really deep move pools, because I noticed on most teams they performed very, very well, and I'm wondering if en masse we need to move quite a few of those up. All right, moving on. Next we have Corphish, which was kind of surprising. Corphish was in tier 3 this season, and I will kind of get into that in a bit, but my overall ranking is 7.5 out of 10, which is to say pretty solid. The pros were Aquajet and Crabhammer go burr, and it's very good in TR and it has good coverage. And that's pretty much it. Like, you know that you're grabbing Corphish for adaptability, Aquajet, and Crabhammer. Waterfall's good too, but Crabhammer has a high crit rate, and those calcs are worth the 90% accuracy, in my opinion. And it's a solid water type. It's got such a bad Spit F. Same as Cubone, which is part of the reason why that felt especially bad, but man, Corphish doesn't even take resisted special hits well. It's pretty bad. The calcs outside of adaptability were good, but not good enough for KOs into a lot of mods. Like, it gets pretty good moves. Like, it has pretty okay coverage. I ran Exozor a few times and things like that. And, like, they can get KOs, but they often don't. Like, most of the things you need it to kill, it has to kill with Aquajet. It's so matchup dependent too. Corphish being a pure water type instead of a water dark type is actually a bit of a detriment, because despite not having as many weaknesses as a dark type does, because it is an offensive piece, the fact that its best offensive move was always a water move, that if I had opponents with like even a couple good water resists at the top end, it was completely unviable to bring Corphish. And there were a lot of things that just would take a hit from it and then just kill it in return easily, like without any real effort. So it was very, very matchup dependent. I'd say it was maybe my most matchup dependent mon overall. And the positioning you had to use with Corphish was pretty careful. I initially thought Corphish was under-tiered. When I drafted it, I thought Corphish is probably a tier 2 Pokemon, and we probably messed up by putting it in this tier. And I am no longer of that opinion. I think that Corphish is actually an amazingly solid tier 3 mon that should remain in that tier. It felt really similar, like when I used Nidoking in Series 9. It reminded me a lot of a Pokemon like that, where in the right matchup, it's extremely good. It has a lot of potential a lot of the time, but it's a mon that cannot live up to it with the consistency you need for a tier 1 or a tier 2. But I really liked Corphish. I really enjoyed it. I think it was fun. I would definitely draft it again. I didn't go into a lot, but it does have pretty good special sets as well. That I ended up not really getting a chance to run, but the reason I ended up not running the special sets were the physical sets. Like, even with no attack investment, it was like Aqua Jet was doing like almost as much as Scald, even when you fully modest special attacked it out. So I ended up running physical most of the time anyway. But very, very good mon. I think Corphish is, though, definitely tier 3. Next is Zorua, which I really loved Zorua. I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. This is very much a team thing, but if you have a team where it synergizes with your team, it's so good. And Illusion was very, very, very good with my team, because especially with Mime Jr., Oddish, and Mienfoo, actually. Zorua Mienfoo was something I liked having in the back as an option. So Illusion, if you have a team where it fits, Zorua's Illusion's super strong. Obviously, Stab, Sucker Punch, and Knockoff is so good, and with physical investment, it can do a lot of damage. The mind game about the potential flowchart was awesome. Like, the fact that the opponent had to prep around seeing Zorua in preview meant good things, and the fact that I could lead the same thing 2 games in a row, but have my opponent wonder if one of them is a Zorua is really, really awesome. I loved that about it. And in general, the special attacking sets did a lot of damage. 65 speed is really good overall. It's not awesome, it's not perfect, but it's fast enough that it can usually get surprise KOs. I didn't end up ever getting to click fake tears on it, but it does have fake tears too. I was looking at doing things like running fake tier Zorua next to Vulpix and having it fake tier something so Vulpix could kill it with Heat Wave or Energy Ball or whatever. So, like, definitely very good. The biggest cons for Zorua, it's just so frail. You want to run Sash on it most of the time. It could run other items and things like that, but for me personally, if I'm going to be leading with something where I want the illusion up, I want it to be on the field long enough to cause as much disruption as possible. It's also a really good revenge killer in the back. Zorua can win most 2v1s in the format, especially if you're running physical with Sucker Punch, which ended up happening in a few of my early games. So it's also just good to run with Sash, because that will usually let it accomplish what it needs to. But that does mean that if you have other Pokemon that really want Sash, then Zorua is a little bit scary. Once it is revealed, once the moveset's revealed, the effectiveness did feel a little more limited. It wasn't a mon I constantly wanted to lead. It was more so like in a set of 3, I'd want to have Zorua in the lead 1 of the 3 times. And it was matchup dependent. Not as matchup dependent as Corphish, but Zorua having the coverage it did and the typing it did, there were a lot of times where, especially on a mon that wants to operate as a lead, if it didn't work well into the opposing team, like if Zorua was just inferior to leading with the thing it was disguising as, then it usually wasn't super worth bringing. So it was matchup dependent. But overall, I really like Zorua. I think very highly of it. I'm curious. I don't think it needs to go up a tier or anything, but I will say it is very strong for tier 3. I like it in there a lot, and I think it's a good pick. I don't know if that's because my team worked really well with it, though, or if because objectively it maybe deserves that. I'd be interested to hear thoughts, but overall I think it's fine where it is. Okay, moving on, Rookidee, which Hunter also grabbed. Rookidee gets a 6 out of 10, which is to say it was fine. Didn't super impress me, mostly did what it's supposed to. Tail and Fake Tear is super nice. That's great move pool. Brave Bird is good, and its natural bulk is pretty usable. You don't actually have to run Sash on Rookidee most of the time. If you invest in its defenses, it'll usually be fine. The main cons, the speed is too low for consistent Tailwind, especially in this format. And the problem is that with Fake Out being as good as it is, it's like, okay, Protect turn 1, and then slow Tailwind turn 2 and hope the opponent hasn't set up a mode on you and tried to roll you. So that was kind of annoying. And it was also, I was always worried about Taunt and Electric types and Rock types and things like that. Most mons on my team this is a team issue, but most mons on my team that wanted Tailwind didn't benefit from Fake Tears, so things like Cubone, which are really good in Tailwind, don't get anything out of Fake Tears. That's not a mon issue, that's just my team did not have slow special attackers. If you had a team with a lot of good slower, like, mid-speed special attackers, like something like a Skrelp maybe, or whatever else, that would be really good. It still died easily, though. Even with okay natural bulk, it did still die, and its damage calcs were always pretty middling, and slow Tailwind was kind of niche. Like, Tailwind's a very strong mode, but I didn't feel like it was ever one of the things I wanted to go to when Sun and TR were so much better and more consistent. So overall, Rookity, especially for the tier it's in, pretty solid. I don't think it's a bad pick basically ever, but I don't think that for my specific team it was particularly great. As to whether it needs to bump up a tier, it potentially could, with Tailwind Fake tiers being what it is, but I don't think it offers anything outside of those two tools, so depending on how highly you value those things depends on whether it should move. Caterpie, which I'm giving a 6 out of 10 to. Caterpie's big gimmick is that it has shield dust, so it can't be faked out, and then you click string shot, and it sometimes goes burr. And especially for the tier that it's in, it's an amazing speed control option. And Electro Web is also pretty nice. Having Electro Web to get -1 speed and break focus ashes is cool. The cons, though, Caterpie is so frail, guys. I would run like max HP Caterpie, and because you have to run Scarf, which we'll get into, but you have to run Caterpie Scarf always, and it would still be like, oh, I clicked Scarf String Shot, and then the opponent would click one move and it was dead. Like, it didn't matter what the move was. I was always so annoyed by that. It's so frail, it's ridiculous. String shot flowcharting doesn't work as well in practice as it did in theory. In theory, string shot flowcharting is really good because you can basically maintain that constant speed advantage, but a lot of the time the opponent would just switch out stuff and then get rid of the drop and then kill Caterpie so it couldn't do it again, which in Caterpie would be then the main speed control for that game, so that always felt really bad. The other reason why it didn't do as well in practice as it did in theory was because if you have something... So if I have, let's say, Caterpie Cubone, which that seems like a great combo, right? Because Cubone can do tons of damage to whatever's in front of it, and Caterpie will slow them down so that Cubone can outspeed and like click Rock Slide or Bone Meringue or even Earthquake, because who cares if Caterpie dies? Like, that sounds really good, but you have to make a really good read with your Cubone, and if they have Fake Out and click it into Cubone, then you're on a back foot. And that was the issue, was that Caterpie doesn't do anything other than speed control, and the speed control could be gotten rid of by swapping out, or even White Herb. So while I do think it's something a lot of opponents wouldn't prep hard for, in practice I don't think you needed to very much. So I think it's solid, especially for the tier. I think Caterpie's very good. I think it's one of the better tier 4 options, but I think in theory, I had this theory about how Caterpie would work, and then I started using it, and I was like, oh, that doesn't work the way I want it to. But it's overall pretty solid. I don't think it's bad. Last mon is going to be Darumaka G, which I picked up via transaction for Mienfoo. I didn't get to use this thing for very long, but I did calc quite a bit with it, so I'm just going to share some initial impressions. I'd say it's like around an 8 out of 10, maybe a little lower. Pros, it's got really nice damage output. I mean, it was getting every calc I wanted it to. The natural bulk's good. With Eviolite, it was able to live some stuff. I was looking at Eviolite Darumaka into Burst, and it looked very good. The coverage is awesome, very good coverage, and having the option of Inner Focus or Hustle is really awesome. Personally speaking, I'd lean Inner Focus in most matchups, but I do think that if you're someone who is of a risky variety, Hustle Darumaka is really, really strong, potentially. The cons, its Ice typing's bad. The speed tier's awful, too. It's like base 50, so you need to give it some support in some way for that. And I didn't have enough time to fully form an opinion. This is just me kind of speaking from what I saw, but from what I saw, it looked like a tier 1, and it looked like a pretty good one at that. So, good on you, Darumaka. I might draft you again in the future. Okay. Overall team thoughts and ranking. I would give this overall team ranking like a 7.5 out of 10. So, I think for the first draft I had in this format, it was really a great team, and it taught me very quickly the things that work in this format and the things that don't work. In the future, for future drafts, I want Mons with much faster speed tiers. The speed was really the biggest issue the team had, And I think the team didn't have enough dedicated support. It was mostly click button, click button, click button. And when I started playing opponents who had really good like prankster options or really good high tier support, my team really struggled. So something like Helioptile being replaced with like a really high end support piece would have been really nice. I was overall really happy with the team though. It had a couple holes and some flaws, but man, I had some games where it was just a machine. Like it just plowed through everything I wanted it to and did extremely well. So I was really happy with that element of the team overall. One of the most fun teams I've ever gotten to play in terms of play. This game was super fun to pilot. If you wanted to draft something similar to this game, I'd actually highly recommend it. Very, very, very fun team to pilot and use with a lot of different options every week, and it was really fun. Like, it was just fun to play. The last thought was that it was a high-risk, high-reward team that often bordered on too risky. My team was like, what if I used Cubone as a main piece and wanted to land sleep powders as a main piece of my team? And what if Heat Wave was one of my most reliable, was one of the moves I had to rely on constantly? There was a lot of that with this comp, which I don't super recommend. I definitely did get lucky in a few games to win, and I do think my overall season record would have been lower had some of those risks not gone in my favor. So it was maybe a little bit too risky overall of a team. So now we're going to talk about the metagame. So there's a couple reasons I want to talk about the metagame. First off, this is my first time playing in this format, so I wanted to kind of just share some like general thoughts, first impressions sort of thing. The other reason is that Twin Leaf is effectively eternal, which is going into that third bullet there, but I'll talk about it now, is that I would love to hear your thoughts on it, especially folks who played in Twin Leaf, in that Twin Leaf is going to stay a division through generational ships. As the generation changes, Twin Leaf will remain as it is. So I would really love to have some discussion about what the metagame looks like and how we can make it fun and balanced for everyone. And I really want to just hear that kind of stuff. So like this is a very like open, sort of more casual discussion. And I do want to give some disclaimers. I did have a very specific team with a very certain playstyle, which in this case was hyper offense, which I don't always play hyper offensive, by the way, but this team was HO, which does influence how I discuss the metagame, and my observations are not the law. Like, I may have some opinions that you may just disagree with, and it might just be because I played a different team than you. And I did watch a lot of games to try to get a sense for some things, but I wasn't always successful with it. Point two is some of the bulkier archetype teams, such as Flamingo and Emboss, are a bit difficult for me to kind of understand. Like, I don't quite know the viability of those teams because I played against them, but I'm not sure how strong it is running very, very bulky in this format. My first impression is it's pretty good based on Flamingo and Emboss's placements for the regular season, but I don't want to say that like bulk is king or anything like that because I'm not 100% on if that's true or not. So, moving on. So I want to talk about the metagame observations. So I want to start with the pros because I actually think this is a great format. The biggest thing is this metagame felt like it rewarded good play. If you played well, you got rewarded for it. If you didn't play well, you got punished, and that felt awesome. Especially coming from Dynamax, where I don't always feel like you get rewarded for good play. That's a me opinion, but the fact is that I never felt like good play was ever disincentivized. I didn't really feel cheated out of any wins or losses. I don't feel like I ever really like had any wins or losses that I shouldn't have been able to obtain, even if I did get lucky or unlucky in a few games. I didn't feel cheated. Like I didn't go away saying, wow, that was bullshit, ever. And I think that the format allowed for consistent pivoting and for threat assessment. You were able to pivot mons easily, you were able to identify the things on the field that were problems and make assumptions, and that feels really good. Experimentation was really awarded. I ran a lot of different items and a lot of different sets on my team over the course of the season, and it felt really good every time. I feel like experimentation's really rewarded in this format, and I really like that about it. I like that you were able to run things that you normally wouldn't run, and it would work or feel good to be able to try something different. Games were quick overall. That's definitely a team thing, because my team was a click buttons and kill you kind of team. But also, generally, little cut Pokemon don't live that long. Like, there are, especially in the Dynamax games, I saw some of those times were getting pretty long. And Twin Leaf does have a few longer games, especially with some of the bulkier teams. But, like, overall, I didn't have, like, a single match that I think broke, like, 35 minutes total. And I've played Dynamax games, sets of 3 that last well over an hour, that sort of thing. So the fact that you don't always have to set aside as much time was nice. Teams overall felt balanced, barring Tier 0. We're going to get into that a little bit, but I think overall, tiering felt good. Like, when I was prepping for an opponent's team, it felt like we were if I ignored the Tier 0 on a team a lot of the time, if they had one, it felt balanced. I felt like I had the same amount of things my opponent did, and that was good. I think that overall the balance was really solid here, and I liked the item usage and Eviolite placement each week. I like that Eviolite is so strong in this format, and I like the game of where you put it, and I also liked putting items on other mons. It felt like I got to be very experimental with items oftentimes, and that's really cool, because it's really fun when you get to do stuff like that. There are some cons I want to talk about here, and these are the things I especially want to hear feedback from on other coaches, see if you agree or disagree. I generally think drafts were not punished enough for Tier 0s, and they were a prep nightmare. I think a rework or removal of Tier 0s may need to be considered. As of the time of recording this, the finalists in Twin Leaf and also in Postwick in both divisions, the finalists of both are teams with Tier 0s. Now, I don't think that is a knock against those players, because they're all extremely good players. But I do think the fact that there isn't a single person who didn't grab a Tier 1 who made it to finals is a little concerning. And personally speaking, I know that those Tier 0s on those teams have been putting in a lot of work. Every time I had to play a Tier 0 in Twin Leaf, it was sort of a prep nightmare. A lot of them were just so strong. Tangela, Ponyta, and Volibee in particular come to mind as being mons that every time I played them, I was like, this is kind of a nightmare. These mons are so strong and so difficult to handle. And could usually just, like, a lot of them could just beat 80+% of my team in of themselves, and I would often have to rely on counterplay that felt odd. Like, into Flamingo, I have to rely on Helioptile and pray that things work out. Into Ollie, I have to pray that Corphish is able to get the job done, which it did one time and the other time it didn't. And into Tangela, it's like, I hope Vulpix can do it, which that doesn't feel good. Like, it felt like there wasn't multifaceted checks to a lot of Tier 0s when I played them. It felt like, I really hope this thing on my team that has a naturally good matchup is able to win, which that doesn't feel awesome. And playing into that point, I do feel like most teams were top-heavy and what to bring each week. Low-tier mons tended to only have specialized roles or niches. I think that's just a format thing. But I didn't ever really feel a need to bring much that wasn't outside of, like, below Tier 3. Like, I didn't have a reason to bring anything below Tier 3 almost ever. I know Flamingo briefly and I chatted about maybe switching to a 5-tier system, or at least talking about that sort of a thing. Interested to see what anyone would think of that, but overall I think that, like, in Little Cup, it did not feel like there was a lot of reason. Like, I never really felt like I had, like, a super strong reason to bring Rookity outside of the fact it was a Tailwind bot. Like, there wasn't a lot of incentive for that sort of thing, and I feel like Dratini falls into a similar boat where it would be like, I'd calc for it and Cubone would just be better. Which, granted, it's Cubone, but that's kind of my point, is that it didn't always feel like you had an incentive to not be a little top heavy. Modes seem extremely strong. I know I'm not going to talk about bulk, but I played with modes, and modes are really tough to stop. When players attempt things, because a lot of the time in most formats that are like this that I've played on ladder at least, you can kind of stall, right? Like, you can stall the TR, the weather, the tailwind. A lot of the time it didn't work. I had a few games where my sun mode or my TR mode just sort of auto won, and I had a few games where the opponent would bring their TR mode or their weather mode or their tailwind and would just auto win into me, and it felt like there was nothing I could do. I think the reason for that is that a lot of mons, especially on more offensive comps like I had, have very low natural bulk, so you reasonably can't actually outstall most of these things once they're set up. Especially because most mons don't have that Eviolite. And some of these mods also get buffed by the mode, right? Especially weather and TR mods get buffed by the nature of the mode. TR mons can be bulkier and have more HP while doing a ton of damage. A lot of weather mons get bonuses to their damage in their specific weather, that sort of thing, which makes it even harder. So I do think modes are really strong, which I don't think that's necessarily a con. I think my problem is that sometimes it didn't feel like people had appropriate counterplay to stall a mode. Like, it felt like there wasn't, like, there were some games, like I think my set with Masto, we had some good TR stall and stuff like that, but a lot of the time I would watch games from other Twin Leaf coaches and it would be like, oh wow, that was like a 4-turn game. Or I would 4-turn game somebody and they'd 4-turn game me in return or whatever. So those kind of things, I don't think they're a con overall. It's just to note that in tiering, modes are good, so we need to be really conscientious of that. And in relation, I do feel like, more so than any other format I've seen, sometimes you would prep for the wrong mode and you would just lose. A great example of that is both my games of the Ollie. The first time I played Ollie, I set up TR and basically just clicked buttons in TR, and it was over very quickly. And it was kind of a wash. And then when we replayed each other, Ollie set Sun into me, and absolutely murdered me, and there was not a lot I could do. And that just is what it is. So I do feel like there was also a little bit of that, because Little Cup Pokemon have much more limited movesets, and they're generally gonna die faster. I do think that sometimes if you prepped for the wrong thing or brought the wrong 4 mons, it was punished more than I'm used to, which I don't think that's always a bad thing, but I do think it's something to note. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially on this page, just to hear what people think about the metagame and where it's at, in particular talking about bulky mons, what we can do to balance in the future, that sort of thing. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about my own placements. So my final placements, I finished 6-3, +4, +10, and placed overall 3rd for the regular season. My record was tied with M-Boss, but I won the head-to-head, so got 3rd overall. And the playoff position I got was semifinalist, which I think overall, like, especially the regular season placement's very strong, especially for a first time in a format like this. So some final thoughts. I got a really cool logo now. Thanks again, Lauren. I think it's great. I'm very excited to be the Schmoove and Shroomishes going forward. I was really happy with my regular season overall. I wouldn't say I took it the most seriously, but I wouldn't say that I also wasn't clowning around. I did play my games with the intention of winning, and I did put in, you know, some prep into most weeks, and I actually did hard prep for a couple of weeks. I feel like I did underperform a bit in playoffs, and I'll need to step up my games in a playoff run in the future. But I don't feel like I'm overall very happy with my season. I have a lot of ideas for how I want to build a team in the future that is improved from the one I'm currently using, which I'm very excited for. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Again, I'm hoping that Twin Leaf coaches will tell me kind of what they thought of the season, what they think was really good about it, what they think needs to be changed or improved for future seasons. And I'll tell you, this was probably my favorite draft season since MDL Season 3. I really enjoyed that season of MDL, but I do think that I wouldn't say I wasn't having fun with draft, but I hadn't quite hit the feeling of a high I had since MDL Season 3, and this was the season that brought it back for me, so that was really, really cool. So thanks to Raz for running the league and being our head admin, and it's been an absolute pleasure. I will see you all again in the future. Bye.